Hello, and welcome to Shrink, the podcast for the mind. I'm Philippe Taron, and I talk to the people who want to have a better understanding of their issues with weight and body image. Today, I'd like to talk about something that so many people experience, yet so few people ever speak about. It's nearly 10 o'clock in the evening. The kitchen has been tidied. The dishwasher is humming quietly in the background. You've already eaten dinner. Maybe you've even brushed your teeth, which, if we're honest, is often our way to announcing to ourselves that the kitchen is officially closed. The day is over. Or at least it should be, and yet, almost without thinking, you wander back into the kitchen. You open the fridge. You stand there. You're not exactly hungry. Your stomach is not asking for food. But your mind has suddenly become incredibly interested in what's inside that fridge. Perhaps there is a piece of cheese, some leftover pasta, half a yogurt, a slice of cake from yesterday. You're not even sure what you're looking for. And that's when the conversation begins. No, I don't really need it. I've been quite good today. Although lunch was a bit bigger than I had planned. Perhaps I'll just have some fruit instead. Well, actually, food has sugar as well. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Before you've even eaten anything, you've already had an entire committee meeting inside your own head. And sometimes that's far more exhausting than the eating itself. I think that's one of the hardest things about food noise. People often assume that it's simply thinking about food, but it isn't. We all think about food. We're supposed to. Our bodies need food. We need to decide what's for dinner. Remember to buy milk. Plan meals for the week. That's normal. That's healthy. But food noise is something quite different. Food noise is when food occupies far more space in your mind than you would ever choose to give it. It's the feeling that your brain keeps wandering back to food, even when you'd much rather be thinking about something else. You finish breakfast and 20 minutes later you're wondering what you will have for lunch. Or you're in a meeting, but part of your attention is calculating whether you'll be able to avoid the biscuits afterwards. You're watching television, but every advert featuring food seems to switch something on inside your head. Or you drive past a bakery and suddenly you're negotiating with yourself. I won't stop. Well, unless they're still warm. Well, maybe I'll buy some for tomorrow. Well, although if I buy 4, I probably won't come back tomorrow. By the time you've reached traffic lights, you've had an entire debate with yourself. And it's tiring, really tiring. Because here is something we don't often acknowledge. Food noise isn't only about food. It's about mental energy. Imagine if every single day somebody asked you hundreds of tiny questions. Should you eat this? Should you avoid that? Was breakfast too much? Will lunch be enough? What happens if someone brings cake into work? Should you save calories? Should you compensate later? Should you start again tomorrow? No wonder so many people feel mentally exhausted. Some people wake up in the morning already negotiating. I've been there. I was like that. Today's gonna be different. It's got to be different. Today I'll be healthy. Maybe I'll skip breakfast. Well, no, I probably shouldn't skip breakfast. Perhaps I will have eggs. Well, actually, eggs are high in cholesterol. Yogurt? No, yogurt has sugar. And before they've even left the house, they've already made 20 food-related decisions. It's no surprise that by the afternoon they're tired enough to make choices they later regret. Not because they're weak, because decision-making itself is exhausting. One of the things I often hear from clients is something that sounds very simple, but actually says so much. They look at me and say, I'm just so tired of thinking about food. They're not tired of eating. They're not tired of cooking. They're tired of thinking. That sentence always stays with me, because food noise isn't loud in the way a fire alarm is, for example. It's loud in the way a dripping tap is loud. One drip doesn't bother you, neither does the second or the third. But leave it running day and night, and eventually it's all you can hear. That's what food noise feels like for many people. It's always there, in the background. Sometimes louder, sometimes quieter, but rarely completely silent. And perhaps the saddest part is that many people have lived with it for so long that they've started to believe this is simply what being human feels like. They assume everybody spends their day having these endless conversations with themselves. They somehow assume everyone lies in bed, wondering what they ate. They assume everyone feels guilty after dessert. Everyone mentally rehearses tomorrow's meal before they've even fallen asleep. But they don't. Not everybody experiences food that way. And that can come as an enormous relief. Because if food noise isn't inevitable, perhaps it can become quieter. Perhaps life doesn't always have to feel like this. Maybe there is another way. And that's what I would like us to explore together today. Because here is something I would really like you to remember before we go any further. If your mind is noisy around food, you haven't failed. You don't have a broken brain. You're certainly not lacking willpower. Your mind is simply trying to solve something. So, the interesting question is not what's wrong with me. The interesting question is, what is my mind trying so hard to do? And I think the answer might surprise you. So, if food noise is not simply a lack of willpower, what's going on? Why does the brain sometimes become so preoccupied with food? Well, there isn't one simple answer. And I think that's important because we often look for one. And we live in a world where everybody comes with one simple answer to your questions, one solution to the things you're dealing with. We want to know what's causing this. Is it hormones? Is it stress? Is it my childhood? Is it because I'm addicted to sugar? Is it because I have no self-control? And the frustrating answer is usually, well, it depends. There are biological reasons, there are psychological reasons, there are emotional reasons, and there are also cultural reasons. In other words, your food noise may be coming from several different directions and at the same time. So let's start with something incredibly basic. Your brain likes food. Of course it does. Your brain is rather fond of the things that keep you alive. Food provides energy, pleasure, comfort, and importantly, predictability. When we're hungry, our brains become more attentive to food. That's not a character flaw, that's biology, doing exactly what biology is supposed to do. And this is where something quite interesting happens. When we don't eat enough, or when we deliberately restrict certain foods, our brain doesn't necessarily respond by saying, "Wonderful, Philip has decided we're not having sugar today. Let's support him with this decision." No. Your brain is more likely to say, "Excuse me, where are the sugar gone? Where are the sweets we're eating usually gone?" And then it starts looking and looking and looking. And suddenly, that croissant you've walked past every morning for 3 years becomes the most fascinating object in Western Europe. You start thinking about it. Then you try not to think about it, which of course means you're thinking about it. And then you become annoyed with yourself for thinking about it. And now you're not only thinking about the croissant, you're thinking about the fact that you're thinking about the croissant. This is how food noise grows, This is how food noise grows into our brain, into your mind. And one of the biggest contributors is restriction. We tend to think of restriction as something very obvious. I'm not allowed to eat chocolate. I'm not eating bread. I'm going to avoid all snacks. But restrictions can be much more subtle. I can have dessert, but only if I've been good. I'll have a pasta, but I won't have anything else with it. I'll have a piece of cake, but then I need to be extra healthy tomorrow. That still creates rules. And rules create something very interesting in the brain. They make certain foods feel important. Think about it. If I tell you that you can have something whenever you want, well, it tends to become less urgent. If I tell you that you can never have it again, well, suddenly we're planning a funeral. It's funeral. I suppose I should have one last slice of cake before I give it up forever. And then somehow the last slice becomes four. Not because cake is uniquely addictive, but because scarcity makes things more psychologically important. We see this in all sorts of areas of our lives. If somebody tells you not to look inside a particular room, you're suddenly desperate to know what's in there. If somebody tells you not to press a button, well, now I really want to press the button. Our brains don't respond particularly well to being told, don't think about that. In fact, let's try something. For the next 10 seconds, I want you to make a real effort not to think about a pink elephant. Don't picture one. Don't imagine its ears. Don't imagine its trunk. Definitely don't imagine it wearing a little pink tutu. Don't think about it at all. How did that go? Well, probably not very well, because in order to check that you're not thinking about the pink elephant, I don't know, I could have come with a green rhino or whatever color, but anyway, your brain has to keep bringing the pink elephant to your mind. And food works in the same way. Don't think about chocolate. Chocolate. Don't think about biscuits. Biscuits? Don't eat after 8 o'clock. Now you're very interested in what time it is. It's one of the reasons why trying to control our thoughts can sometimes make them louder. And this is where the constant internal conversation becomes so exhausting. Imagine you're trying to get through the day while carrying on a conversation with yourself about every piece of food that enters your orbit. You see a biscuit? Should I? No, but I really want one. You don't need it, but I could have one. Yes, but then you'll want another. I'll have one and then I'll stop. You never stop at one. That's not true. Well, you remember Christmas? And suddenly, you're cross-examining yourself over a biscuit as though you're appearing before a parliamentary committee or a judge. And eventually you eat it, of course, but the conversation doesn't stop. Now it becomes, why did I eat that? I wasn't even hungry. Well, I've ruined today now. I'll start again tomorrow. And that last sentence is particularly important. I'll start again tomorrow. Because once we believe we've failed, we often stop making decisions based on what our body actually needs. And we start making decisions based on what we think we can get away with. I've already blown it, so I might as well have this. And that can create a cycle that looks something like this: restriction, preoccupation, craving, eating, guilt, more restriction. Let me say this again: restriction, preoccupation, craving, eating, guilt, more restriction. And then back around we go. It's a rather miserable little merry-go-round. And the interesting thing is that from the outside, it can look like a problem with eating. But underneath it, there is often a problem with thinking. We're spending an enormous amount of energy monitoring ourselves. And monitoring yourself all day is exhausting. Every meal needs to be assessed. Every portion needs to be judged. Every craving needs to be investigated. Every decision needs to be approved. And eventually, eating becomes work. This is why I think one of the most helpful things we can do is begin moving away from the idea that we need to constantly supervise ourselves. Because supervision isn't the same as care. You can care about yourself without constantly monitoring yourself. And that distinction is incredibly important. There's another reason food noise can become particularly loud, and that's when we're tired. When you're rested and you've had enough food, enough sleep, and perhaps you've had a reasonably calm day, it's much easier to pause. You can notice a craving and think, interesting, I'm craving chocolate. I wonder what that's about. But imagine doing that at 10:30 at night after a long day. You've worked, you've answered emails, you've dealt with people, you've perhaps looked after children, you've made dinner, you've tidied up, you've worried about money, you've worried about the relationship, you've worried about your body, you've scrolled through Instagram and seen 12 photographs of people who apparently have their entire lives organized, and now your brain is tired, very tired. At that point, the prospect of sitting down and having an existential conversation with yourself about your emotional needs is not particularly appealing. Your brain wants something easy, something immediate, something familiar. And food is very good at providing that. This is where emotional eating comes in. And I want to be careful with that phrase because emotional eating is often represented as though it's something terrible, a terrible habit we've developed. But emotions and eating have been connected throughout human history. We eat to celebrate, we eat to connect, we eat when we're sad, we eat when we're bored, we eat when we're nervous, we eat when we're in love, we eat when someone has a baby, we eat when someone gets married, we eat when someone dies. Food is woven into our emotional lives. So it's not surprising that when we're struggling emotionally, food sometimes becomes part of the picture. The problem isn't that food can comfort us. The problem is when food becomes our only available form of comfort. Because then every difficult feeling starts to look like a food problem. Anxiety? Eat. Boredom? Eat. Loneliness? Eat. Stress? Eat. And then, of course, we get angry with ourselves because the food didn't solve the original problem. But perhaps we were asking it to do a job it was never designed to do. Food can soothe, but it can't have the difficult conversation with your partner. It can't make your job less stressful. It can give you a sense of purpose. It can't make you feel genuinely connected to another human being. And it certainly can give you 8 hours of sleep. It can give you a moment of relief. And sometimes, frankly, a moment of relief is exactly what we need. There is no shame in that. But if food is the only place you know how to go to when you're overwhelmed, then naturally your brain will keep sending you there. This is where I like to think of food noise as a kind messenger. Not an enemy, a messenger. Sometimes the message is, you're hungry. Sometimes it's, you're tired. And then sometimes it's, you've been restricting me all day and I would really like some food now. Thank you very much. And sometimes the message is, something doesn't feel right. That last one is particularly important because sometimes the food noise isn't actually asking for food. It's asking for something else. And this brings us to one of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself when the noise gets loud. Not, how do I stop myself eating, but what am I actually needing right now? And notice that I said needing rather than wanting. Because you may genuinely want chocolate. You may genuinely want crisps or a glass of wine. You may genuinely want a piece of toast with an irresponsible amount of butter on it. And that's okay. We don't have to turn every desire for food into a psychological investigation. Some people do that way too much, even some therapists. Sometimes you just want the chocolate. Have the chocolate, enjoy it, move on. But sometimes the craving is carrying another message. Sometimes what you're really hungry for is rest, or comfort, or connection, stimulation, or reassurance, or simply a break from having to be responsible for everyone and everything. And that is where food noise becomes interesting. Because once we stop treating it as an enemy to defeat, we can start properly listening to it. And when we listen, we may discover that underneath all that chatter, there is something much quieter trying to get our attention. The good news is that you don't have to spend the rest of your life negotiating with food. When you begin to listen to what the noise is really trying to tell you, it can slowly become quieter. And that's such a nice feeling and a relief. Thank you for listening.